Adrian first noticed it in the quietest way possible. Not a text, not a late-night call. Just the way Saren stopped asking him small questions. She no longer asked if he wanted coffee in the morning or reminded him about his keys. These tiny things, almost invisible, felt deafening to someone who had shared 11 years of life with another person. The house still ran on routine. Breakfast at 7, dishes done after dinner, lights out by 10. Saren still folded his shirts, still paid the bills, still smiled politely when he spoke. But something had shifted. Her smiles ended too quickly, like a pause she couldn't sustain. Her phone was always face down now. When Adrian entered a room, conversations ended, not abruptly, but carefully, deliberately. He told himself it was exhaustion. Work had been heavy. The car needed repairs. Money had been tight. He didn't want to become the kind of man who suspected without reason. So he stayed quiet. One night, brushing his teeth, he heard Saren laugh in the bedroom. Soft. Restrained, almost as if she didn't want him to hear. When he entered, she looked up too fast. "It's just a podcast," she said, her voice too smooth. Her phone screen went dark immediately. Adrian nodded. He didn't ask which podcast. Lying in bed later, inches apart, he felt the distance like a physical presence. Her back was turned, not in anger, but in quiet self-protection. He stared at the ceiling and felt something unfamiliar, grief, maybe, settle in his chest. Not rage, not jealousy, just the quiet fear that he had already missed the moment things began to slip away. Days passed, and Adrian began noticing patterns instead of single moments. Saren started leaving the house earlier on Saturdays, claiming she needed time for herself. Her clothes changed, not boldly, but deliberately. Hair brushed twice. A careful attention to detail he hadn't seen in years. He never followed her. He didn't want to shadow her life. Instead, he watched from the edges. How she moved through the kitchen, how she paused before answering him, how her attention seemed to drift somewhere else. One evening, Adrian came home early. The house was quiet, lights dim. Saren sat on the couch, phone in her hand, smiling at the screen. Not a polite smile. A private one, like the one she once reserved for him. She didn't notice him at first. When she finally looked up, her face changed, not with guilt, but with calculation. Slowly, she set the phone aside. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," Adrian said too quickly. Calm, almost distant, though inside, his thoughts were racing. They ate dinner in silence. Forks clinked. The clock ticked loudly. Adrian wanted to ask everything, but none of it felt safe. He wasn't afraid of the truth. He feared what it would confirm, that he had been absent emotionally, that she had been lonely long before anyone else noticed. Later, as Saren slept, Adrian sat awake staring at her face. She looked peaceful, loved. And for the first time, he wondered, not who the other man was, but which parts of Saren he had stopped seeing. The following week, Adrian started noticing small things he had once ignored. Saren's perfume lingered longer than usual, and the faint sound of laughter floated from her phone whenever she thought he wasn't paying attention. He didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, he studied the spaces between them. The empty chair at the breakfast table, the distance in her gaze, the way she answered questions almost mechanically. Work was busy, deadlines pressing, but his mind wandered constantly. During meetings, he caught himself picturing her in the living room, scrolling through her phone, her smile faint but unmistakably different. A quiet ache settled in his chest, not jealousy, but a creeping sadness. The life they had built, the small rituals he had once taken for granted, now seemed fragile, almost unreal. That Saturday, he waited until she left for her usual walk. The house was still. He walked through the room slowly, touching the edges of the life they had shared. Her sweater folded neatly in the drawer, the coffee mug she always placed by the sink. Everything normal, yet everything had shifted. Adrian realized he had been sleeping in a life that wasn't fully awake. He didn't know if he was mourning what was gone or what he had never truly noticed. Later that evening, Saren returned. She hummed softly as she took off her coat, careful to hang it in the closet just so. Adrian pretended to be absorbed in his book, but he felt every movement, every breath she took. When she finally spoke, her voice was light, casual, as if trying to restore normalcy. "How was your walk?" he asked, keeping his tone steady.
Good.
"Just thinking," she replied, avoiding his eyes. He nodded. "Anything interesting?" "Not really," she said, still distant. They sat together in the living room, the quiet stretching between them like a thin veil. Adrian thought about pressing, asking, demanding the truth, but he didn't. He knew that pushing too soon could destroy whatever remained of their fragile connection. Instead, he focused on listening to the subtle rhythms, her sighs, the weight of her movements, the way her hands fidgeted with the edge of the blanket. Adrian realized that this was a different kind of attention, a painful, patient attention. One that didn't rush, one that didn't need answers immediately. He didn't yet know what Saren's secret was, but he felt the shift in himself, the desire not to control, but to understand. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a way to navigate this together without shattering everything entirely. A few nights later, Adrian stayed up long after Saren had gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the hum of a heater. He picked up her phone from the kitchen counter, not to snoop, not really, but because the device had become a symbol of distance, a silent wall between them. The screen lit up with notifications, messages he didn't fully read, just glimpsed. Laughs, emojis, careful words that weren't meant for him. He put it down immediately, heart racing, guilt and sorrow tangled together. Adrian realized he was afraid, not of her, not even of the other man, but of losing the person he had married without ever fully seeing her. For hours, he traced the path of their years together. Small dinners, long walks, quiet mornings with coffee in hand. Each memory now carried a tinge of fragility, a reminder that love, even when steady, could bend and break without warning. He felt exhaustion, not physical, but emotional, like he had been standing under a slow rainfall he hadn't noticed until the puddles formed around his feet. The next morning, Adrian spoke to Saren as if nothing had shifted. He asked about her plans for the day, made casual remarks about breakfast, and observed her reactions carefully. She answered politely, her laughter lighter than usual, but the same distance lingered. She moved around the kitchen efficiently, but without their old shared rhythm. At work, Adrian replayed small moments from home, the way Saren's eyes flicked toward the phone, the tilt of her head when she smiled at a message, the faint scent she always wore now. He didn't confront her yet. He didn't know if he could. Instead, he allowed himself to feel the loneliness of proximity, the ache of sitting next to someone every day and sensing a part of them had quietly slipped away. By evening, he found himself standing by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Saren sat in the living room, reading, unaware of the storm in his mind. Adrian knew he had a choice: to chase shadows, to demand the truth, or to observe, listen, and wait. Something deep inside told him that only patience, not confrontation, might give them a chance to understand what had quietly gone wrong. A week later, Adrian noticed the way Saren avoided the small touches they used to share. The hand on the shoulder while passing in the hallway, the brush of fingers while reaching for the same glass, the quiet kiss on the cheek before leaving for work, all of it had disappeared. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't confrontational. It was the slow, almost imperceptible retreat of someone slipping away without a word. Adrian didn't ask. He didn't accuse. He simply observed, cataloging the tiny absences as if they were pieces of a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. He realized that the hardest part wasn't that she might be with someone else, it was that he hadn't noticed her withdrawing. He had been present in body, but absent in mind, absent in attention. And now, the cost of that absence was echoing back to him in quiet, relentless waves. One evening, Saren came home later than usual. Adrian was in the living room, pretending to read, but really listening. Her keys jingled softly, and her voice, usually steady, faltered just slightly as she called out, "I'm home." Adrian looked up, eyes calm, and smiled faintly. "Long day." "Yeah, just needed some air," she replied, setting down her bag carefully. Her movements were deliberate, slow, almost as if she was trying to hide something, but Adrian noticed. He noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the hesitation before sitting down, the way she avoided his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. He didn't say anything more. He let the silence fill the space. They ate dinner quietly, words minimal, glances fleeting. Adrian realized that the truth would eventually reveal itself, not through confrontation, but through these small, quiet gestures. And in that moment, sitting across from her, he understood that love wasn't just about proximity. It was about truly seeing, and he had only just begun to see Saren in the way he should have all along. The next morning, Adrian left early for work, but he didn't feel the usual calm routine. The house was quiet, sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor where Saren had once lingered for morning coffee. He paused at the door, noticing the empty mug still on the counter. It was a small thing, trivial in any other life, but to him it felt like a sign of absence, of her presence pulled somewhere else. Throughout the day, he caught himself imagining her conversations, her laughter, the subtle way her fingers hovered over her phone when she thought he wasn't looking. He didn't want to admit it, but he was tethered to this unease, this quiet heartbreak that crept into every corner of his mind. He realized he had been living alongside Saren, but not truly with her. And now, every moment apart revealed how much ground they had silently lost. That evening, Adrian returned home earlier than usual. Saren was in the living room, scrolling on her phone. She looked up, startled, and quickly hid the screen as if a secret had been caught in the act. Adrian didn't say anything. He simply sat in the chair across from her, observing, letting the silence stretch between them. "Everything okay?" he finally asked, calm, almost gentle. "Yes," she replied too quickly. Her voice trembled slightly before she steadied it. Adrian nodded, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. He noticed the subtle shift in her posture, the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked away when she thought he wasn't paying attention. He didn't want to confront her with anger or accusations. He wanted to understand, to feel the reality of the distance they had allowed to grow. As the evening faded into night, Adrian sat quietly, listening to the soft hum of the heater and the faint sound of Saren's breathing. He realized that the hardest journey wasn't discovering the truth, it was learning to face it with patience, compassion, and clarity. And he understood, deep inside, that this quiet awareness was the first step toward either healing or letting go. A few days later, Adrian tried something different. He didn't ask about the affair directly. He didn't accuse. Instead, he invited Saren to sit with him in the backyard, where the late sun painted golden streaks across the garden. The air was still, and for the first time in weeks, Adrian felt the possibility of quiet honesty. They sat together, shoulder to shoulder, but not touching. He noticed the way her hair fell across her face, the careful way she adjusted her skirt, and the small, almost imperceptible sigh she released when she thought no one was paying attention. Adrian spoke gently. "I feel like we've been distant." Saren's eyes flicked up, startled. I guess." He nodded. "I want to understand. I want to see what's been happening, even if it's hard." For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, slowly, she turned toward him. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I felt invisible." Adrian felt the weight of her words settle between them. Invisible. That was the word. He hadn't been absent physically, but emotionally, he realized he had allowed her to feel unseen for months, maybe years. They stayed there in silence, letting the words hang. Adrian's mind traced their entire life together. Small birthdays, shared errands, quiet Saturday mornings. So many moments when he had been present but not fully aware, and she had grown lonely in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. "I never noticed," he said finally, voice low, honest. "I thought I was paying attention, but I see now. I wasn't." Saren's eyes glistened. "It's not just you," she whispered. I made choices too. Choices that hurt you. Choices I didn't fully understand until now." For the first time in weeks, Adrian felt something shift, Not relief, not anger, but recognition. Recognition of failure, yes, but also of care, of truth. The quiet admission, the shared acknowledgement, created a fragile bridge between them. Adrian realized that healing would not come from blame, from anger, or from confrontation. It would come from seeing each other fully, painfully, honestly. And that night, sitting together in the fading light, he understood that the first step toward either forgiveness or closure was simply this: being present, truly present, for the person he loved. The following morning, Adrian woke earlier than usual. He didn't rush. He walked through the house slowly, noticing the small details: the coffee mug left on the counter, the blanket Saren had folded neatly on the couch, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the hall. Each small sign reminded him that life went on, even with the quiet fractures between them. Saren emerged from the bedroom, rubbing her eyes. She paused when she saw him in the kitchen. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," Adrian replied, calm. He poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one to her. They stood in silence for a moment, steam curling between them. Adrian realized how much he had missed these tiny rituals, the shared, quiet moments that had once been the foundation of their life together. He didn't need grand gestures. He needed presence. And now, more than ever, he wanted to be fully present for her. They sat at the table, coffee warming their hands, and Adrian spoke gently. "I think we both got lost in our routines. I didn't see you the way I should have, and I know, maybe you felt invisible. I'm sorry." Saren looked at him, eyes glistening but steady. "I felt lonely, Adrian. And I made choices I shouldn't have. I never meant to hurt you." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I know. And I know there's no quick fix. But I want to understand. I want us to rebuild, carefully, slowly." She reached for his hand, tentative but real. "I want that too," she whispered.
"No fireworks. No dramatic confessions."
Just hands held across the table, quiet acknowledgement, and the shared understanding that love, even when fractured, could survive if they chose to see each other fully. In that moment, Adrian realized that healing wasn't about finding the other person at fault. It was about seeing each other, accepting the truth, and allowing the small, careful steps toward connection to begin. Over the next few days, Adrian noticed small changes in both of them. Saren no longer hid her phone when he entered the room. She lingered a little longer at breakfast, letting their eyes meet for a moment before looking away. And Adrian, for his part, paid attention in ways he hadn't before, not just noticing, but really seeing her. They began talking more, not about the affair at first, but about little things: plans for the weekend, books they wanted to read, a new recipe they wanted to try. The conversations were slow, careful, sometimes awkward. But each word, each pause, was a bridge being rebuilt, fragile but real. Adrian realized that love wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was about presence. It was about noticing the quiet spaces where the other person lived. One evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky turned shades of orange and violet, and Adrian felt a strange peace he hadn't felt in months. Saren leaned slightly toward him, and he didn't pull away. "I know it will take time," Adrian said softly. "And I don't expect things to be perfect." "I don't either," Saren replied. "But I want to try. I want us to try." They didn't need to say more. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was quiet understanding. Adrian realized that the truth, no matter how painful, could also be the path to connection. And in that quiet evening light, he understood that seeing each other fully, acknowledging mistakes, and choosing to stay present was the first real step toward healing. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope, not loud, not dramatic, but steady, patient, and real. Weeks passed, and their lives settled into a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, brief flashes of insecurity, and the occasional silence that felt heavier than air. But Adrian learned to notice without judgment, to listen without assuming, and to be present even when the weight of the past lingered. Saren, for her part, became more open, Not just about small things, but about her emotions, fears, and regrets. One quiet evening, Adrian found Saren in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared tea. He smiled at the sound, a genuine, unforced smile. It reminded him of why he had loved her in the first place. Not for grand gestures or easy days, but for the small, human moments, the laughter, the shared glances, the quiet care that had always been there, waiting for him to notice. Later, they sat together in the living room, holding hands but not speaking. Adrian reflected on the journey they had taken, the invisible cracks, the quiet betrayals, the long weeks of observation and reflection. He realized that the affair had not destroyed them. It had revealed the places where love had been neglected, the spaces that had been taken for granted. "I think we can do this," Adrian said softly. Saren looked at him, eyes full of a mixture of relief and lingering sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "We can."
No fireworks. No dramatic resolutions.
Just presence, understanding, and the slow, patient rebuilding of trust. Adrian felt a deep sense of closure, not from punishment, but from acknowledgement, honesty, and the quiet courage it took to truly see each other. And in that stillness, he understood something essential. Love wasn't perfect, but when nurtured carefully, it could survive even the quietest storms.